Revenge tastes sweetest when served cold and in silence. Her name was Lara Benson. She was 34 years old. Raised in the quiet outskirts of Cambridge, Lara's life had been a series of battles fought mostly alone. A single mother to 8-year-old Oliver, she juggled 2 jobs to keep them afloat, mornings at a local coffee shop and evenings at a budget hotel reception desk. Her family, steeped in tradition and appearances, had always cast her as the black sheep. Her younger sister Vivian was the golden child, effortlessly beautiful, successful by society's standards, and endlessly adored by their mother Margaret. While Vivian glided through life wrapped in privilege and charm, Lara carried the weight of abandonment, stigma, and silent judgment. Yet, when the invitation arrived to Vivian's wedding in a grand hall in London's West End, Lara, with a fragile hope for reconciliation, accepted. She brought Oliver, dressed in a suit she had stretched 2 paychecks to afford, clutching to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be the night to heal old wounds. The wedding day shone with glitter and elegance, but for Lara, it was a gauntlet. She sat quietly in the 3rd row, feeling the sharp contrast between her worn dress and the polished guests around her. Oliver's eyes sparkled with innocence and excitement, unaware of the cold undercurrents swirling beneath the surface. Vivian floated through the crowd like a movie star, basking in the spotlight, her smile as radiant as the chandelier-lit room. Margaret, their mother, was the epitome of grace, her attention unwaveringly fixed on her youngest daughter. Lara felt invisible, a shadow in her own family's celebration. But she stayed, for Oliver's sake, and for the sliver of hope that family might still mean something. As the speeches began, the atmosphere thickened. The usual light-hearted anecdotes from friends blurred into background noise for Lara. Then Vivian took the microphone. Her voice was sweet, her smile polished, until she turned the spotlight directly on her sister. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began, "and especially my big sister, Lara. She's always been such a strong example, a single mother managing on her own, clearly unwanted by anyone else." The room erupted in laughter, sharp and cruel. Lara's heart plummeted. Her mother's voice cut through the mirth. A used product, but still polished well enough for the occasion. The laughter intensified, colder and more vicious. Oliver tugged at Lara's sleeve, his young face crumpled in confusion. "Why did she say that about you, Mum?" he whispered. The room's warmth had turned to ice. Lara's world shrank to the humiliating sound of her family mocking her in front of her son. The weight of betrayal crushed her. She searched the room for a single ally. Her grandfather, Norman, avoided her gaze. Cousins scrolled their phones with smirks. Even uncles who once showed kindness now looked away. The humiliation, the injustice, it was a public sentence she bore in silence. But beneath the surface, something shifted. The pain carved out space for a quiet fury, a resolve that would not be silenced. She clenched the napkin in her lap, her legs trembling, swallowed the tears that threatened to spill. She could walk away, disappear into the night with Oliver, and endure the shame in silence, but the seed of something else had been planted, a reckoning waiting to unfold. Then, unexpectedly, the groom, Callum, Vivian's polished fiancé, rose from the head table. The room hushed instantly, his gaze fixed on Lara, not Vivian, not their mother, but her. His face was tight with something fierce and unreadable. He took the microphone without hesitation. "I can't stand by and watch cruelty dressed as comedy," he said, voice low but firm. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Callum's words cut through the facade of celebration like a blade. "What I just witnessed was not family. It was mockery. Vivian, you chose to mock your sister, a woman who has done more than you'll ever understand, and you made her son watch it happen." Vivian faltered, speechless for the first time. Callum turned to the room. "I'm marrying into this family, but if cruelty is the tradition, I must reconsider who I want to be." With that, he set down the microphone and walked out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Lara stood frozen, clutching Oliver's hand. The laughter had died. The room was emptied of warmth and pretense. Margaret's scolding voice rang out, but it fell flat, powerless. For the first time, Lara felt a strange weight lift. No longer the scapegoat, no longer shrinking in the shadows. Her grandfather approached, eyes red-rimmed, whispering an apology years too late. Outside, in the cold London air, Lara held Oliver close, their silence speaking volumes. The wedding that was meant to break her instead forged a quiet promise. This was not the end, but the beginning of her return. The story was far from over, and the reckoning was just beginning. The evening air outside the grand hall was sharp against Lara's skin as she stepped away from the suffocating silence that had settled inside. Oliver stayed close, his small hand firmly wrapped in hers, seeking comfort in the only person he truly trusted. The bustling streets of London, glowing with the soft hum of streetlights and distant traffic, felt both alien and strangely liberating after hours of cold stares and biting words. Lara's heart still throbbed from the shock, the humiliation still raw beneath her skin, but something inside her had shifted irrevocably. As they walked toward the taxi rank, Lara's mind replayed every moment, Vivian's cruel words, her mother's mocking laughter, the smirks of relatives who should have shown loyalty. The injustice wasn't new. It had been a constant undercurrent in her life, but tonight it had been laid bare for all to see. The bitter taste of betrayal stung sharper, because it wasn't just strangers who had turned against her. It was her own family. The people who were supposed to protect her had instead weaponized her struggles for their amusement. She had been the family's shame, the scapegoat, the punchline. And all the while, she had carried on, working 2 jobs, raising Oliver alone, trying to find dignity in the cracks of their fractured lives. Oliver looked up at her, his young face still clouded with confusion and hurt. "Mum," he said softly, "why did Aunt Vivian say those things? Why did Grandma laugh?" His voice trembled, the innocence of childhood colliding with the harsh realities of adult cruelty. Lara swallowed the lump in her throat, fighting back tears she refused to let fall. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "people say things to hurt others when they're afraid or jealous, but that doesn't mean it's true." She squeezed his hand, vowing silently that she would protect him from their poison, even if it meant standing alone. When they reached their small flat on the edge of town, the contrast was stark. The modest 2-bedroom was nothing like the opulence of the wedding venue, but it was theirs. The familiar creak of the floorboards and the scent of worn fabric brought a strange comfort. Lara tucked Oliver into bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest as he drifted to sleep. His trust in her was the only light she needed, yet as she closed his door and leaned against it, the weight of the evening pressed down again. She was exhausted, not just from the day's events, but from years of invisibility and dismissal. But beneath the exhaustion, a quiet fire was kindling. The injustice she had endured was no longer something to swallow silently. It was a wound that demanded acknowledgement, a betrayal that called for more than just endurance. Lara knew that tonight was a turning point. The family's laughter might have echoed through the grand hall, but it would not echo forever. Somewhere deep inside, a plan began to form, not loud or vengeful, but calculated, patient, and certain. If they thought she was broken, they were wrong. This was only the beginning. In the days that followed the disastrous wedding, Lara found herself caught between 2 worlds, the searing pain of rejection and the flickering embers of a resolve she hadn't dared to acknowledge before. The messages and missed calls from distant relatives and strangers who had witnessed Callum's unexpected speech flooded her phone, but she ignored them, retreating into the quiet of her small flat. The world outside was buzzing with gossip and sympathy, yet inside, Lara wrestled with the rawness of her emotions. The humiliation she'd suffered wasn't just a momentary sting, it was decades of neglect, judgment, and betrayal all colliding at once. Vivian, meanwhile, retreated into silence. The polished social media feeds that once showcased her perfect life now scrubbed clean of any reference to the wedding, as if the entire event had been erased. Her usual circle offered no support, the sharp whispers behind closed doors growing louder. But Vivian's downfall was just beginning, and Lara could almost taste the irony. For years, Vivian had basked in the family's unyielding favor, wielding her beauty and charm like weapons. Now, the very people who had adored her began to question the facade. The cracks beneath her glittering surface were becoming impossible to hide. Lara's mother, Margaret, made one cold phone call, not to apologize, but to chastise. "You embarrass the family," she hissed, her voice dripping with disdain. "You should have laughed it off like everyone else." Lara listened, her fingers tightening around the receiver. When Margaret finished, Lara's voice was calm, steady, and unlike anything she had mustered before. "I'm not your scapegoat anymore," she said simply, then ended the call. The finality of those words surprised even her. No more hiding, no more silent acceptance of cruelty. The chains of expectation and shame were breaking. At work, Lara noticed subtle shifts too. Colleagues who had once barely acknowledged her now glanced her way with newfound respect or curiosity. The video of Callum's speech, shared widely on social media, had turned her from a forgotten figure into a symbol. A single mother who refused to be humiliated, who stood tall despite everything. Strangers sent messages of encouragement, some even offering help or friendship. But Lara knew this was hers to own, a battle she couldn't outsource. Late at night, after Oliver was asleep, Lara began to plan. Not wild schemes or dramatic confrontations, but quiet, strategic moves. She researched legal rights, consulted friends in communications, and started documenting every slight and injustice she'd ever endured. Her mother's controlling grip and Vivian's relentless cruelty needed exposure, not through angry outbursts, but through undeniable truth. She would shine a light on the hypocrisy that had kept her in the shadows for so long. In the quiet moments before dawn, Lara felt a strange calm. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. The humiliation had been excruciating, the pain nearly unbearable, but it had also forged something unbreakable within her. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for Oliver, for every silent voice that had been crushed by cruelty disguised as tradition. And as the city around her stirred to life, Lara's quiet revolution was already taking shape. The first opportunity came sooner than Lara expected. A local reporter, Emma Clark, reached out after seeing Callum's speech go viral. Emma wasn't interested in the scandal or the family drama. She was drawn to Lara's story, her resilience, her quiet strength beneath years of cruelty. Over a cup of tea in a modest cafe near the train station, Lara shared pieces of her life she had long buried, the abandonment by Oliver's father, the endless work to keep their little flat warm and their lives afloat, the cold silences at family gatherings, and the sharp barbs disguised as jokes from Vivian and Margaret. Emma listened without judgment, her notebook filling with Lara's truth. The interview was published in a respected London newspaper, nestled between the evening's headlines. It wasn't sensationalized or exploitative, it was raw, honest, and powerful. Lara's words painted a picture of a woman who had been dismissed and mocked but refused to be erased. The article struck a chord. Comments poured in, messages from single parents, estranged siblings, and people who had suffered quietly in their own families. Lara's story became a mirror, reflecting the hidden wounds many carried. At home, Oliver noticed the change in his mother. She held her head a little higher, her smiles a little braver. He even started pretending to give speeches to his toys, declaring that Mum is the bravest queen in the world. Their small flat felt lighter, filled with the flickering hope that things could be different. But Lara knew the fight was far from over. Vivian remained a looming shadow, and Margaret's disdain still lingered like a cold draft. Then came the invitation. Not from her family, but from a prominent charity supporting single parents, a gala event in central London. Lara was invited as a guest speaker, a chance to stand before a crowd not to beg for sympathy, but to demand recognition and respect. It was a chance to reclaim her narrative, to expose the hypocrisy that had haunted her for years. Yet, standing at the edge of that stage, Lara felt the old doubts creep in. The fear of being judged, dismissed, or worse, forgotten once the spotlight moved on. The night of the gala arrived. The venue was grand, far removed from the cold halls of Vivian's wedding. The room buzzed with people who understood struggle and strength alike. Lara's speech was measured but fierce, laying bare the scars of family betrayal and the resilience it forged. She spoke of the silent battles of single mothers, the courage it takes to face the world alone, and the quiet power in refusing to be ashamed. Applause followed, genuine and warm, unlike the hollow laughter she'd endured. Backstage, a well-dressed woman approached. Margaret's social circle had heard about Lara's rise. This woman, a family acquaintance, offered a thin smile and a veiled warning about damaging reputations. Lara's reply was icy calm. "My reputation isn't what needs saving. It's the truth that needs telling." The woman's smile faltered. Lara realized then that her quiet revenge wasn't just about personal justice. It was about shattering the polished facades that masked cruelty. As the gala ended and the city lights flickered outside, Lara felt a surge of clarity. The humiliation she'd suffered was no longer a shackle, but a weapon. She would continue to expose the hypocrisy, not with anger, but with unwavering truth and dignity. Vivian's perfect image was beginning to crack, and Lara was ready to make sure it shattered completely, but on her terms. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Lara's interview and gala speech had ignited a quiet fire, and whispers of her story spread beyond the small circles of single parents and local supporters. Invitations arrived to community talks, podcasts, even a panel discussion on family dynamics and social stigma. Lara found herself standing in rooms filled with strangers who listened intently, who nodded in understanding, who saw her not as the family's shame, but as a symbol of strength and defiance. It was a new world, one she had never imagined for herself, and yet it felt like coming home. But with the rising spotlight came the inevitable backlash. Vivian, ever the image-conscious sister, launched a carefully crafted social media campaign portraying herself as the victim of family drama and misunderstood intentions. Photos of lavish vacations and charity events flooded her feeds, accompanied by carefully worded posts about family unity and forgiveness. The public was divided. Some rallied behind Lara, others clung to Vivian's polished facade. Margaret, their mother, remained silent publicly but doubled down on her cold disdain in private messages that Lara intercepted, thinly veiled threats and reminders of the family's reputation. One evening, while sorting through mail, Lara found an anonymous letter slipped under her door. The words were sharp and chilling. "You think you can rewrite your story? Remember who you are? You don't belong with us." The message was meant to intimidate, to remind her of the family's power and reach. Instead, it fueled the quiet fire burning within her. Lara knew the path ahead would be fraught with obstacles, but retreat was never an option. At work, the environment shifted subtly. Some colleagues who once ignored her now treated her with a mix of admiration and wariness. A few whispered behind her back, unsure whether to embrace the woman who had become a local figure or to distance themselves from the perceived drama. Lara paid them no mind. Her focus was on Oliver, on building a life where he could grow without the shadows of family shame hanging over him. Then, a chance discovery changed everything. While clearing out a box of old family photographs and letters, sent by her mother as a subtle reminder of past failures, Lara uncovered evidence of a long-buried secret. Letters between Margaret and Vivian's father revealed a tangled web of deception, favoritism, manipulation, even attempts to sabotage Lara's relationships and stability. The family's perfect image was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie, built on betrayal and cruelty. This revelation was the turning point. Lara no longer carried just the weight of her own pain, but held proof of the hypocrisy that had poisoned her entire family. The quiet revenge she had begun was about to take a sharper edge. She would expose the truth, not with rage, but with the calm precision of someone who had been underestimated for too long. The game had changed, and Lara was ready to play, and win. Alone in her tiny kitchen, the late-night silence wrapped around Lara like a cloak as she stared at the faded letters spread before her. The words penned in Margaret's precise handwriting revealed a family far from the picture-perfect image they projected. There were admissions of calculated interference in Laura's life, whispers to Oliver's father that kept him away, veiled threats to friends who offered support, and cold strategies to keep Laura isolated and ashamed. Vivian's rise was no accident but a carefully staged performance, with their mother as the director. Shock rippled through Laura's chest. The woman who had once been her protector was revealed as the architect of her pain. But beneath the shock, a fire ignited, a fierce clarity that this betrayal was the foundation of the torment she'd endured. The laughter at Vivian's wedding, the cruel jokes, the family's silence, all part of a long-standing pattern designed to keep her invisible and broken. Laura's mind raced, but she forced herself to breathe, to steady the whirlwind of emotions. Anger, hurt, and disbelief fought for dominance, but she knew she had to stay calm. This was not a moment for recklessness, but for strategy. The truth was her weapon now, and she would wield it with precision. The family's gilded lies were about to be exposed, quietly, but irreversibly. She thought of Oliver, sleeping peacefully upstairs, unaware of the storm brewing beneath their roof. For him, she would be unwavering. No longer would she allow the legacy of cruelty to shape their lives. Laura began compiling the letters, photographs, and documents into a dossier, a meticulous record of decades of deceit and manipulation. She reached out cautiously to Emma Clark, the journalist who had first told her story, sharing the evidence and her intent to reveal the truth on her terms. The response was immediate and supportive. Emma understood the delicacy required, but also the power such revelations could hold. Together, they planned a feature exposing the family's hypocrisy, not as a sensationalist attack, but as a call to recognize the damage wrought by secrets and cruelty disguised as tradition. Laura's story would become more than a personal vendetta. It would become a beacon for others trapped in silent suffering. Meanwhile, Vivian's social media continued to sparkle with curated perfection, but cracks were beginning to show. Subtle slips in her polished persona, hints of tension in public appearances, and whispered doubts among mutual friends suggested her carefully constructed world was unraveling. Margaret's icy messages grew more desperate, revealing a family losing control. Laura felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of balance shifting. The humiliation she had endured was no longer a chain but a catalyst. The woman who had once been dismissed, mocked, and silenced was now the one holding the truth and the power. The quiet revenge she had nurtured was no longer just an idea. It was a force gathering momentum, ready to break through the silence and demand justice. Just as Laura was preparing to move forward with the exposé, an unexpected message arrived, this time from Callum. The man who had once stepped into the storm at Vivian's wedding now reached out privately, offering support and a proposition that shifted the entire dynamic. Callum admitted he had been unaware of the full extent of the family's toxicity, but since that night, he'd been quietly investigating behind the scenes, uncovering inconsistencies and whispers that confirmed Laura's discoveries. His respect for her strength had only grown, and he wanted to help her ensure that the truth reached beyond the whispers and social media noise. Callum's offer was simple but powerful. He had connections in the media and legal world, resources that could amplify Laura's voice and protect her from the inevitable backlash. More importantly, he wanted to stand beside her, not as a savior, but as an ally. This unexpected alliance unsettled Laura at first. Years of betrayal had taught her to trust cautiously, but the sincerity in Callum's words, combined with his own risk in confronting his fiancé's family, forged a fragile bond of trust. Together, they began to map out a plan. Laura would share her story and evidence with a major investigative journalist, while Callum would coordinate legal counsel to prepare for any attempts at intimidation or defamation from Margaret or Vivian. The goal was clear: reveal the family's hypocrisy, expose the cruelty hidden beneath their polished veneer, and reclaim the narrative on Laura's terms. Meanwhile, the tension within the family deepened. Vivian's social circle grew restless as rumors circulated about the fallout from the wedding and the upcoming revelations. Invitations were rescinded, social events avoided, and whispers of scandal began to erode her carefully maintained image. Margaret's once unshakable confidence showed cracks, her usual cold composure replaced by frantic calls and veiled threats. Lara, meanwhile, found unexpected strength in this alliance. Callum's calm presence and unwavering support bolstered her resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself and Oliver anymore, she was challenging an entire system of cruelty disguised as tradition. The knowledge that someone from within the family's inner circle had turned against the falsehoods gave her courage to push forward. In quiet moments, Lara reflected on the irony. The man who had once been the perfect fiancé, the symbol of the family's ideal future, was now her unexpected comrade in dismantling that very facade. Together, they were rewriting the story, turning humiliation into power, betrayal into justice. As the day to go public approached, the air around Lara thickened with anticipation. The quiet revenge she had nurtured was no longer just a simmering fire, it was ready to blaze. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same. The day the story was set to break, London seemed to hold its breath. Lara sat in her small flat, the dossier of evidence neatly stacked beside her laptop, as the newsroom buzzed with final preparations. The feature was more than just an article, it was a reckoning. It detailed decades of manipulation, cruelty hidden beneath polished smiles, and the relentless strength of a woman who refused to be erased. Emma Clark's investigative piece was thorough, unflinching, and backed by irrefutable proof. As the article went live online, the response was immediate and explosive. Social media erupted with a storm of reactions: shock, outrage, support, and disbelief. Comments flooded in from people far beyond Lara's circle, single parents sharing their own stories, advocates applauding her courage, and ordinary readers condemning the hypocrisy of Margaret and Vivian. The hashtag #Justice for Lara trended, drawing the attention of national news outlets and even prompting calls for discussions on family dynamics and social stigma. Vivian's world crumbled with shocking speed. Invitations vanished, sponsors withdrew, and whispers of scandal followed her every move. The carefully curated image she had built over the years shattered, replaced by a growing narrative of privilege abused and cruelty concealed. Margaret attempted damage control, issuing vague denials and accusing Lara of seeking attention, but the weight of the evidence rendered such claims hollow. Lara, meanwhile, was no longer the quiet figure sitting at the back of family events. Interviews, panel discussions, and public speaking invitations followed, each one a platform to share not just her pain, but her message. That strength could rise from humiliation, and that exposing the truth was the first step toward healing. Oliver watched his mother with wide eyes, proud and inspired by the woman who had stood up and refused to be silenced. Yet, amid the public victory, Lara remained cautious. The legal team, coordinated by Callum, was ready for any retaliation. The family's attempts to discredit her were predictable, but they no longer held power. With every challenge, Lara grew stronger, her quiet revenge evolving into a movement that questioned the very foundations of family loyalty and societal expectations. Callum, steadfast and unwavering, became more than an ally. He was a partner in every sense. Their bond, forged in the crucible of betrayal and defiance, deepened as they navigated the storm together. The man who had once been the groom in a wedding that never truly happened was now a pillar in Lara's new life, a symbol of justice and genuine love. As the weeks passed, the fallout continued. Vivian withdrew from public life, her silence a stark contrast to the noise Lara's story had created. Margaret's grip on the family's reputation loosened, her influence waning as more relatives quietly distanced themselves. The world that had once mocked Lara now watched, listened, and learned. But the most profound change was within Lara herself. No longer weighed down by shame or silence, she carried herself with a dignity that radiated strength. The journey from humiliation to justice was far from easy, but it had forged a woman who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. The quiet revenge had blossomed into a loud declaration. She was no longer a victim, but a victor. and her story was just beginning. The tension reached its peak one rainy evening when a formal invitation arrived at Lara's door, an unexpected summons to a family gathering, hastily arranged and laced with an uneasy tone. The message was clear. The family wanted to confront the storm she had unleashed, to reclaim control over the narrative, and to demand a semblance of loyalty. But this time, Lara was not the frightened girl hiding in the shadows. She was a force forged through years of pain and quiet defiance, ready to face them on her own terms. The venue was a stately manor on the outskirts of Cambridge, grand yet cold, echoing with the weight of unspoken grievances. As Lara arrived, flanked by Callum and with Oliver safely at home, the room fell into a hush. Margaret stood at the center, her usual air of authority diminished but still present, flanked by Vivian, her expression a mixture of anger, shame, and fragile defiance. The conversation began with veiled accusations and demands for loyalty, the familiar chorus of family expectations and threats of ostracism. But Lara met each barb with calm clarity, dismantling their arguments with facts, evidence, and the quiet strength of someone who had nothing left to prove. She spoke not just for herself, but for every silenced voice, exposing the hypocrisy that had been masked by tradition and appearances for far too long. Vivian's facade cracked under the weight of Lara's words. The golden child, once untouchable, was reduced to a trembling figure, her carefully constructed world unraveling in front of those who had once worshipped her. Margaret's attempts to regain control faltered, her authority eroding as relatives exchanged uneasy glances, some nodding subtly in Lara's favor. The room, once charged with tension and judgment, shifted. The silence that followed was heavy but different, no longer filled with contempt, but with a reluctant recognition. Lara's quiet revenge had reached its crescendo, not through anger or spectacle, but through unwavering truth and dignity. As Lara left the manor that night, the rain washing away the residue of years of pain, she felt a profound sense of release. The family she had once sought to belong to was no longer a prison, but a chapter closed. With Callum's steady hand in hers and the promise of a future unburdened by shame, Lara stepped into the night, ready to write the next pages of her life. The battle had been fierce, the wounds deep, but the victory was hers. The reckoning was complete, and the quiet revenge had become a lasting legacy of strength, justice, and unyielding courage. Months passed, and the ripples of Lara's courage continued to spread far beyond the walls of that cold family manor. The story that once threatened to shatter her had become a beacon for others. Single parents, forgotten siblings, anyone silenced by cruelty disguised as tradition. Invitations to speak at schools, community centers, and even national forums filled her calendar, each one a chance to transform pain into purpose. Oliver grew alongside her strength, proud to call her his mother, a quiet hero in a world that often overlooked the brave. Vivian remained distant, her attempts to rebuild a fractured reputation met with skepticism and quiet dismissal. Margaret's influence waned, her cold control slipping through the fingers of a family no longer willing to hide behind facades. The family gatherings became sparse, the old traditions replaced by a fragile new understanding, one that acknowledged pain, demanded accountability, and refused to tolerate cruelty. Lara's life was far from perfect. The long hours at work, the sleepless nights, the constant balancing act of motherhood and healing remained, but beneath it all was an unshakable foundation of dignity and self-worth. She no longer sought approval from those who had rejected her. She created her own family in the friends who stood by her, the community that embraced her, and the love she cultivated with Oliver and Callum. One quiet evening, as she tucked Oliver into bed, he looked up with a thoughtful smile. "Mom, do you think Aunt Vivian will ever say sorry?" he asked, the innocence of a child touching a deep place in her heart. Lara paused, then shook her head gently. "Some people never change, love. But that's okay. We don't need their apologies to know who we are." As she closed his door and stood by the window, the city lights flickering like distant stars, Lara felt a profound sense of peace. The journey from humiliation to justice had been long and painful, but it had forged a woman who knew her worth and refused to be silenced again. The revenge she had quietly nurtured was no longer about retribution. It was about reclaiming life, dignity, and hope. And as the night settled around her, Lara smiled softly, knowing this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one written by her own hand, with strength, courage, and unbreakable grace.